Over the decades, kickboxing has seen some remarkable competitors, but ask any 10 aficionados of the sport who the best of all time is, and a good half of them will answer the same name: Giorgio Petrosyan. It isn't just because of Giorgio's incredible defense. It isn't because of his jaw-dropping technical ability. It's because Giorgio, from 2007 until 2013, went on an undefeated streak the likes of which kickboxing had never seen and may never see again, and didn't even stop there. Yes, Giorgio's absolute mastery of the sport inside and out makes him one of the greatest kickboxers in the world, but it is what he has done with that mastery that makes him the GOAT in the eyes of so many. In this video, we'll unravel the story. Keep watching to discover one of the most popular picks for #1 all time: the kickboxer who couldn't be touched. Background: the untouchable kickboxer hails from a small country at the crossroads between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Armenia was home to roughly 3 million people in 1985. Back then, it was one of 15 republics that made up the Soviet Union. It was here and then that Giorgio Petrosyan was born. He grew up in Armenia's capital city, Yerevan. Young Giorgio was born into a tumultuous period in Armenian history. When he was 6 years old, the Soviet Union fell. Armenia suddenly became an independent nation, but a bumpy road lay ahead. Economic problems and regional conflicts made life a living hell for Giorgio and his family. In 1999, when he was 13, Giorgio fled Armenia with his brother Stepan and his father Andranik. They piled into a truck alongside numerous other migrants and rode for days, traveling way outside of the country. They were headed for Western Europe, but since the border with Turkey was closed and remains closed to this day, they were forced to go north through Russia and Eastern Europe. After 10 consecutive days on the truck, they arrived in the Italian town of Gorizia and finally got off. They came to Italy seeking a better life, but in the beginning it was anything but. Giorgio, his brother, and his father were homeless. They slept at train stations, or worse, out on the street, sometimes braving temperatures well below freezing. But soon enough, the determined trio got their first stroke of luck. They were taken in by a local church group who gave them a place to sleep and the chance to work as caretakers in a factory. Now that they'd finally gotten some footing, they were soon joined by Giorgio's mother and his 2 other siblings. Giorgio becomes a fighter. While living in Gorizia and working at the factory, Giorgio befriended a local who trained at a nearby gym called the Satori Gladiatorium Nemesis Gym. Quite a mouthful. Once Giorgio had memorized the name and found its address, he went there and told the owner he wanted to start training in Muay Thai. He was a huge fan of Bruce Lee and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Giorgio was also growing and desperate for a place to channel his energy. To his surprise, the owner turned out to also be Armenian. Alfio Romanut seemed to Giorgio like the very person he was destined to train with, but Giorgio was devastated when Alfio said, "Kanerik Shatkich. Sorry kid, you're too small." Giorgio was 14 and barely over 100 pounds. Frustrated, he refused to leave the Armenian trainer alone until eventually Alfio relented. He decided against his better judgment to let Giorgio start training with him, even though he was skeptical Giorgio would be successful. Alfio's skepticism was short-lived. Over the next 2 years, Giorgio proved himself to be one of the most disciplined and dedicated young men Alfio had ever worked with. By the age of 16, he had achieved such a strong technical grasp of the sport, from footwork to defense to counter-striking, that Alfio felt he was ready to launch a career. Giorgio began fighting professionally, but in the early days, it was anything but glamorous. To help support his family, Giorgio took a job as a bricklayer. To keep fit, he would get up at the crack of dawn and run for an hour before heading to the construction site. Once he was done laying bricks, he would run again, this time to the gym, and train with Alfio until well after dark. He says he had, quote, "no vices." He ate healthy, and he avoided the Saturday night discos that were popular among his Italian peers. Early fights. His abnormal level of self-control and focus gave the teenage Armenian immigrant a noticeable advantage over his early opponents. His first Muay Thai fight came in February 2002. He faced a local Italian whose name is lost to history, and when you look at the outcome of the matchup, it's easy to imagine why. At the time, Giorgio was 119 pounds, fighting as a bantamweight. He was so nimble that his opponent barely landed a strike, yet Giorgio was able to strike so easily and forcefully that he supposedly broke a toe. Whether or not this last detail is more legend than fact, the fight went well enough to completely launch Giorgio's Muay Thai career. He entered his first title fight in November 2003, competing against Giannato Zarbo for the honor of Italian Muay Thai champion. In the third round, Giorgio knocked him out. With Zarbo on the floor and his fists in the air, Giorgio became the MTA Italian national champion a month before his 18th birthday. As Giorgio's career began to flourish, his skills continued to grow, so did his strength and size. By 2004, the 19-year-old was all the way up to 143 pounds. He defeated Fabio Pinca in the MTA European Championship. In 2005, he won several notable fights, including one in his hometown of Gorizia against Shemzi Bakiri. Life transformation and world champion. Still months shy of his 20th birthday, Giorgio had at this point transformed not only his own life, but his family's as well. Giorgio began traveling regularly, training in Thailand and competing in kickboxing tournaments all over Europe. He was consistently dominant. In fact, he only lost one fight, a Bangkok brawl that went to Nonthananpur Pramuk by decision. By 2007, Giorgio was over 150 pounds. He'd moved all the way up into middleweight. Losing for the first time didn't appear to slow him down. In fact, it ignited a fire in Giorgio Petrosyan that would not be extinguished for several years. He was about to embark on a legacy-making run. Now at his physical prime, Giorgio went on to win his next 42 fights. More than a few of those fights were upsets. For example, on March 14, 2009, he faced Andy Sauer in Milan. Sauer was already regarded as a world-class fighter by that time. Spectators were shocked just to see Giorgio lasting through multiple rounds against the Dutch all-timer. The kickboxing universe was really shocked when, after 3 rounds and an extension, the judges crowned Giorgio the winner. It was one of the great upsets in modern kickboxing history, and it meant Giorgio's improbable win streak would continue still further. Riding on serious momentum, Giorgio spent the rest of 2009 defeating other elite fighters, though it was less and less of a surprise each time. He conquered Jabbar Askarov in 3 rounds in Japan. He defeated Faldir Chabari by unanimous decision in Amsterdam. He entered the final 8 of the K1 Max tournament, where he beat Albert Kraus, another former K1 champion, by unanimous decision. He went on to knock out Yuya Yamamoto and advanced to the final, where he faced Andy Sauer once again. This time things went differently. Giorgio never let Sauer get close. After 3 rounds, one of which saw Giorgio knee Sauer to the ground, Giorgio was unanimously pronounced the 2009 K1 champion. The run continues. At this point, Giorgio Petrosyan had already been on a legendary run, going undefeated for almost 3 years. But remarkably, even at this apparent peak of his career, he was far from done. He would go on to remain undefeated across dozens of additional fights over the course of the next several years. What made this even more noteworthy was the fact that he was plagued by an injury during the latter half of the run. He missed a match against Masato Kobayashi in late 2009 because of a broken hand. Within a month, he was back in the ring, defeating Mohamed Diaby. A couple months after that, he re-injured his still healing hand while defeating Kem Sitsongpinong by unanimous decision. Although Giorgio missed 2 more scheduled fights due to this, he made another swift return, winning the K1 Max title again in 2010 and breaking his hand again. Giorgio's persistent hand injury shows his toughness and determination, but it also speaks to the countless poor souls on the receiving side of that hand throughout his incredible run. He won back-to-back K1 Max championships, leaving a trail of supine bodies in the ring behind him. He also won the first ever Glory World Series Lightweight Championship in 2012, and that was 1 year after breaking his hand yet again during a match against Hinata Watanabe in Tokyo. In 2013, Giorgio sought to once again win back-to-back titles, this time under Glory World Series. He had been on one of the longest winning streaks in combat sports history. Fans and experts alike were scratching their heads and murmuring that if he won the Glory Lightweight title again, they'd have little choice but to crown him the greatest kickboxer who ever lived. In the semifinals, Giorgio faced Andy Risti, hailing from Suriname. Risti had recently been on an impressive winning streak himself. He also had a slight height advantage over Giorgio, and a reputation for using his size and length aggressively. Giorgio was ready for him. Unlike many of Risty's former opponents, Giorgio made him work hard for it, but after 2 rounds, Risty came on even stronger, landing a left uppercut that knocked the kickboxer who couldn't be touched to the canvas. Giorgio struggled to get back on his feet, but couldn't manage it in time. At last, after 42 wins in 6 years, Andy Risty had toppled to King of Kickboxing. Risty somersaulted across the ring and roared into the stands, proclaiming himself the new #1. Yet as impressive as his victory was, replays of the fight confirmed what some viewers had already suspected: he'd been fighting a compromised Giorgio Petrosyan. Shortly before the end of the second round, viewers noticed Giorgio had resorted to fighting almost entirely one-handed. Giorgio would later confirm this was the case. In fact, the issue had arisen much earlier. In the first round, he'd broken his hand a 5th time. Legacy. Andy Risty went on to become one of Glory's best lightweights, and he deserves tremendous credit for ending one of the longest winning streaks ever seen. But beating Giorgio Petrosyan did not make him the GOAT of the sport. In the eyes of many, Giorgio still stands alone. After losing to Risty, he went on another run, winning 16 fights and grabbing titles under both Bellator and one championship. In 2021, he faced Superbon Banchamek and was heavily favored to win. However, Banchamek shocked the world by knocking Giorgio out with a high kick in the second round that broke the legendary fighter's jaw. It was arguably the most brutal loss of Giorgio's career to date, but it was also only the second time Giorgio Petrosyan had ever been knocked out in the ring. Both of Giorgio's winning streaks ended in dramatic fashion, but both streaks, in particular the first, have cemented him as arguably the most dominant kickboxer the sport has ever seen. His complete mastery of technique, stemming from his years spent training with fellow Armenian Alfio Romanut in Italy, has made him almost impossible to defeat. More than any other kickboxer, Petrosyan has seemed to have something like an invisible force field around him. Despite hand injuries and only a couple of rare knockouts, he's spent most of his career taking minimal damage, a rare feat even among the sport's most elite competitors. His unmatched skill made him the one kickboxer who simply couldn't be touched. It may be a long time before we see another fighter as supreme as Giorgio Petrosyan, the man who fled Armenia as a boy, worked in a factory, and trained and fought his way to absolute greatness.